The Bells of Verdirosso in the ancient hills of Tuscany, where olive groves stretch like silver-green veins across sun-bleached slopes and the cypress trees whisper secrets to the wind. There once stood a village that time chose to forget, a place called Verdirosso. It was not listed on modern maps, nor spoken of in tourist guides or travel forums. No signposts pointed the way, and no locals, even in nearby villages, would tell you where to find it. Verdirosso was buried beneath layers of silence, erased not by accident or decay, but by intention. The only ones who remembered it were the very old and the very mad, and even they spoke the name as one might whisper a curse. Once, it had been a place of great beauty, stone houses clinging to a hillside like a necklace of pearls, vines hanging from balconies, and a bell tower that rang each morning with a sound so pure it was said to keep evil at bay. The villagers believed in simple things: harvest, prayer, tradition. They celebrated the feast of St. Luca every February with music, wine, and firelight that lit up the square like a holy flame. But in the winter of 1897, during one such festival, something changed. The bells tolled at midnight, and once, then again, and then endlessly, without pause, long past morning. When the sun rose, the village was silent. Fires still burned in hearths. Bread remained uncut on tables, but no living soul was ever found. Horses were still tied in stables, chickens still clucked in coops, but every man, woman, and child had vanished as if they had stepped out of time. The bell tower stood tall and cold, its doors locked from the inside, and the bells had stopped only at the first cry of dawn. After that, no one returned. The place was abandoned, fenced off, avoided. Locals said the hills never grew the same again. The wind didn't feel right. Birds flew in wide circles around that patch of land. And when children played too close to the edge of the woods that touched Verdirosso, they came back different, or didn't come back at all. Over the decades, the story faded into rumor, then myth, until only a few believed it had ever been real. But one of them was Claudia Moretti, a 36-year-old photojournalist known for her work in war zones and decaying monasteries. After a nervous breakdown and a scandal involving a falsified quote, Claudia had fallen off the radar. Her publisher refused to return calls, and her agent gently suggested she had take a long sabbatical. Angry, broke, and burning for one last story, Claudia took refuge in an abandoned convent near Arezzo, where she stumbled upon a leather-bound ledger in a dusty library. Its ink faded, but legible enough. The book had belonged to a travelling monk from the late 1800s, who wrote of a village with the reddest stones and a bells that told beyond reason, a place where if forgiveness had been refused, and the mountains mourned in silence. The last line read, Verdirosso was swallowed by its own prayer, where she became obsessed. The idea of a ghost village, forgotten by time and erased from memory, was exactly the kind of story that could put her back on the map. Over the following weeks, she tracked down scraps of evidence, an 1896 census with a list of names that disappeared a year later, a painting in a private collection of a faceless bell ringer in a field of fire, a death certificate signed in Verdirosso in 1898. Though the place had supposedly ceased to exist, the final clue came from an old priest in Siena who, after much wine and confession, whispered the route to her goat path hidden behind a collapsed aqueduct near Montepulciano that led up into the hills. But if you go, he said, trembling, do not stay past sunset. And if the bell tolls, run. She climbed. The journey was grueling. The journey was grueling. The path was almost entirely reclaimed by nature, with brambles tearing at her clothes and ancient pines looming like sentinels. It took 2 days of hiking, guided only by notes in her journal, a compass, and stubborn instinct. Then one late afternoon, she crested a ridge and saw it, Verdirosso. The village appeared like a mirage, nestled in a fold of the hills, untouched by the modern world. Stone cottages leaned into each other like gossiping old women. Wildflowers grew through broken steps. A dry fountain stood at the center of the piazza, cracked but proud. And above it all rose the bell tower, tall and thin, with black ivy crawling up its sides like veins. The air was warm but felt wrong, too still, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. Claudia entered the village with camera in hand. The houses were filled with dust, but everything was intact. A child's toy on a windowsill, an old dress hanging on a hook, plates on tables, a half-burnt candle on a mantel. Time had not ravaged this place. It had simply paused. She documented everything, capturing shots of the chapel frescoes which depicted saints with hollow eyes and halos that cracked like eggshells. One painting in particular showed the bell tower, surrounded by villagers bowing, while a shadowy figure hovered above them, faceless and crowned with branches. She tried to ignore the way the fresco's eyes seemed to follow her, tried to explain the chill on her neck as a draft. When the sun dipped low, she set up camp in what had once been the priest's rectory. It smelled faintly of rosewater and mildew. That night, she dreamed vividly of villagers standing in rows before the bell tower, each with their mouths sewn shut, each holding candles that wept wax like tears. They pointed to the tower as it rang, and when Claudia turned to look, the bell was missing. In its place hung a man, face hidden by a black sack, swinging gently with the rhythm of the tolls. She woke gasping. Her camera battery was dead. Her drone, which she had packed neatly into her bag, now lay smashed in the center of the piazza. The photos she reviewed from the day before now showed things she hadn't seen. Blurred figures in windows, footprints in dust behind her, eyes in reflections. She decided to leave. She gathered her things and began down the path. But the forest had changed. The trees now leaned differently, as if watching. The trail markers were gone. Her compass spun wildly. Hours passed and she only returned to where she began, the village. Frustrated, she screamed into the hills. Only silence answered. At dusk, the bell tolled once. It echoed through the valley, impossibly loud, even though there was no bell mechanism inside. She had climbed the tower earlier and seen the empty beams, the broken pulley. Then came the second toll, slower, deeper, like a heartbeat. The wind picked up, dry and hot. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. The village changed before her eyes. Windows darkened. The houses no longer looked abandoned, but watchful. The chapel doors groaned and slammed shut. The frescoes glowed faintly in the fading light. The third toll came as the sun disappeared completely, and everything stopped. Claudia ran, first to the chapel, then to the tower. The villagers were there now, all of them. Dozens, hundreds. Their faces were white and stitched at the lips. They didn't move, didn't breathe, but their heads turned slowly to follow her every step. She reached the tower, climbed its spiral staircase, cracked with time, the air growing heavier with each step. At the top, instead of the old bell housing, she found a stone altar, ancient and slick, with something that shimmered red in the dying light. On it lay a leather-bound journal, brittle and warped. She opened it. The words were in Italian, dated from 1897. They belonged to Father Giuliano, the priest of Verdirosso, who confessed to making a pact with a spirit he called Colui Sato Loradisi. Beneath the roots, the village had been dying from plague, and the hills refused to give fruit. Wells were dry, so Giuliano struck a deal. Life in exchange for loyalty. The bell would ring 3 times every 33 years to renew the pact. The villagers would not die, nor age, but they would no longer be alive in the eyes of God. Their voices were the price, and the bells were their chains. The priest's last entry read, "The next toll shall come for the outsider who sees too much, Claudia looked up. The tower was full of shadow now, and something moved at the base of the stairs. Slow, deliberate wrong. She backed away, pressing against the altar. The floor beneath her trembled. Then, with a groan of ancient stone, the altar split in half, revealing a spiral stairwell descending into darkness. She should have run, but something in the air, some whisper in the bones of the tower, compelled her downward. Beneath the village was a catacomb, older than the foundations, carved from volcanic stone. The walls were covered in roots pulsing like veins. Statues lined the corridor, figures kneeling with faces erased. At the end stood a chamber lit by an unseen source, and in it waited a throne of twisted branches and bones. Upon it sat the figure from the fresco, faceless, crowned with a tangle of olive roots, arms outstretched like an invitation. She doesn't remember what happened next. Weeks later, hikers found a camera on a rock ledge outside Montepulciano. Its SD card contained 1397 photos, the last of which showed Claudia standing in the chapel of Verdirosso, but her face was different. Her eyes were entirely black, her mouth stitched, and she stood beside the fresco, which now depicted a new figure, a woman holding a camera, lips sewn shut, looking directly out of the wall. And sometimes, just before sunset, hikers near the hills say they hear bells ringing where there are no churches, and if they follow the sound, they never return.